In 1935, Moto Guzzi built a motorcycle sewing pancake. Sounded like an angry sewing machine and terrified anyone foolish enough to ride it at full throttle. Ladies and gentlemen, and my friend who still thinks his electric scooter is basically a Ducati Panigale, welcome back to Ride the Future, the channel where we explore rare, ridiculous, and occasionally brilliant machines that history left behind. Now, picture it. 1935, northern Italy. Mussolini is strutting around. The Germans are getting uncomfortably enthusiastic about uniforms, and Moto Guzzi's engineers are fueled by espresso strong enough to wake the dead. Most motorcycles at the time? Big, clunky singles. Loud, slow, and reliable enough to double as farm machinery. But Moto Guzzi? They asked, what if we took two cylinders, laid them flat, made them hug the tarmac, and then stuck them inside a frame that looks like it was designed by a blacksmith on holiday? That's right, the Moto Guzzi 500 Bicilindrica. A 500cc racing twin that was as weird as it was wonderful. Now, to understand why this thing existed, we need to set the stage. Racing in the 1930s was basically a combination of mechanical genius and reckless bravery. There were no airbags, no safety fences, and helmets offered about as much protection as a Super Bowl strapped to your head. In Italy, motorcycles were a national obsession. Moto Guzzi had already proven themselves with smaller capacity bikes, winning European championships in the 250 and 350 classes. But the big 500 class, that was dominated by the British Nortons and German DKWs. Carlo Guzzi, founder and chief tinkerer, looked at that and said, "No, grazie, we're Italian. We don't follow trends, we invent them. Pass the grappa." So in 1933, they unveiled the Bicilindrica at Monza. By 1935, it had evolved into a serious championship contender. This wasn't just a motorcycle, it was Italy's technological middle finger to the rest of Europe. Let's talk engineering, because this thing was bonkers. Engine, a 498cc air-cooled 120-degree V-twin mounted horizontally. Imagine if an aircraft engine had a child with a pizza oven. That's what it looked like. Power, about 44 horsepower at 7,000 RPM. For the 1930s, that was outrageous. Most family cars of the era, like the Fiat 500 Topolino, barely scraped 13 horsepower. Yes, a racing Moto Guzzi could outrun your entire family while you were still fumbling for your picnic basket. Compression ratio, a modest 6.5.1, low by today's standards. But remember, fuel in the 1930s was barely more refined than paint thinner. Top speed, around 140 km/h, 87 mph. That may sound leisurely today, but in the 1930s, with tires thinner than Timmy's excuses for missing work, frame, pressed steel backbone, innovative, rigid, and heavy enough to survive a small war. Suspension, girder forks at the front, and, here's the kicker, absolutely nothing at the back. Zero. Niente. Your spine was the rear suspension. Congratulations, you are the shock absorber. Imagine racing down Monza's banking at 140 km/h while your vertebrae rattle like dice in a cup. That, my friends, is courage. Or stupidity. Often the same thing. On the racetrack, the Bicilindric, its flat V-twin layout gave it excellent handling and a low center of gravity. Riders reported it felt stable compared to the taller singles of the era. But reliability? Well, let's just say it was Italian. Parts fell off, valves stuck, and if you sneezed near the carburetors, the whole thing might faint dramatically. Still, it won its share of races. Moto Guzzi's works riders, men with nerves of steel and possibly no managed to pilot these machines to European podiums throughout the mid-1930s. It was a proof of concept, showing the world that Italy could compete with, and sometimes beat, the mighty Norton and BMW. And here's the fun part. The Bicilindrica laid the groundwork for Moto Guzzi's later experiments, culminating in the legendary 1955 Moto Guzzi V8 Grand Prix bike. That machine had 8 cylinders, 78 horsepower, and a soundtrack that made grown men weep. Without the Bicilindrica, the V8 never would have happened. So, what's it worth today? Well, since only a handful were ever built, fewer than 10 in racing trim, survivors are rarer than Timmy turning down a bad crypto investment. The last documented auction I could find was at R.M. Sotheby's, where a Bicilindrica fetched around $170,000, roughly $190,000 USD. That's right, nearly 200 grand for a motorcycle that actively tried to murder its rider. And honestly, I believe it deserves every cent. Because when you're buying a Moto Guzzi Bicilindrica, you're not just buying a motorcycle, you're buying a piece of Italian racing history, a machine that changed the trajectory of motorcycle design, and possibly the best conversation starter you could ever park outside an espresso bar. So, would you ride one of these? Or would you prefer your motorcycles to not set your trousers on fire while rattling your teeth loose at 140 km/h? Let me know in the comments. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to Ride the Future. Because suspension, our decision-making process is questionable at best.